Welcome back everybody to the Battle for Bikini Bottom World Record Explained series. Quickly, I want to thank you for watching the first video and leaving a like and comment. It really helped a lot because I want as many people as possible to see these videos and that really helps boost their visibility, so thank you so much. Today we're going to talk about how to speedrun downtown Bikini Bottom, which has become one of my personal favorite levels in the speedrun. Without hesitation, let's pick up right where we left off at Patrick's Dilemma. The first thing we're going to do here is pause the game and warp back to Bikini Bottom. Despite only having collected 3 spatulas and 3 socks from Jellyfish Fields, we're actually done here for the rest of the speedrun. Jellyfish Fields is a very large, open area, and a lot of the objectives are very spread out. So in order to complete our most immediate objective, which is getting inside of the Robo Sandy boss fight for 15 spatulas, we gotta go to other areas with faster spatulas and faster socks in order to quickly make that requirement of 15. However, there is another very fascinating condition that makes the early portion of the speedrun unique. And in the split we talk about today, we're going to be setting up the groundwork for that major exploit. So pay close attention because it's starting right now. In just about every other part of the speedrun, we're going to be drawing a straight line from our position to our objective with our movement. But in this scenario, we're actually going to walk a curved line around Mr. Krabs to avoid his text box. If we receive Mr. Krabs' initial text from this area of the hub world, the exploit we're going to perform later will not work. So we're going to cut it as closely as possible around this invisible trigger that borders Mr. Krabs and make our way to the doorknob on Squidward's house, which actually has collision. I believe this is another one of those harder than it looks moments, because despite not having the glamour of being a frame perfect trick, climbing up Squidward's house is actually very difficult for most beginners who get into the game. And that's because some of the collision on this thing just barely lets your feet get caught and climb up. The way SpongeBob's feet swing around when he jumps actually impacts his collision, because his collision capsule is actually a lot more complex than just a normal cylinder. It actually shapeshifts and reforms as he jumps through his animation. And this is why I just love games in the early 2000s era. They just don't make them like they used to. One of the biggest questions I receive on this part is actually whether it's optimal to collect the golden underwear on top of Squidward's house. And it is, because otherwise we wouldn't be collecting it. But you'll see that later in the run it's important for a couple of damage boosts, which otherwise would be impossible because we wouldn't have enough health. Getting from Squidward's house to SpongeBob's house is actually a small exploit here, because in a normal playthrough, these balloons are carrying one of 2 buttons that when activated allow SpongeBob to platform from Patrick's house to Squidward's house to SpongeBob's house. But in a speedrun, we're actually going to abuse the fact that the balloons have collision as well, so by stylishly platforming onto those and jumping straight to SpongeBob's house, we can reveal a spatula on top of the pineapple. Now that we have 5 golden spatulas, we can enter downtown Bikini Bottom, which again is going to be a bit different than what we're used to in a casual playthrough. By jumping on top of this bamboo rod and then over the taxi pad, we can land within the zone that allows SpongeBob to call the taxi before the cutscene showing that you have enough spatulas is finished. This allows us to call the taxi early, effectively skipping this short cutscene and saving 1 second off the speedrun. Immediately upon entering downtown Bikini Bottom, you're going to learn some new tech called SpongeBob storage. When SpongeBob lands on a surface after double jumping, he outputs an animation which interrupts SpongeBob transformation. Normally, upon immediately touching the SpongeBob, he'd transform, but because the animation is playing, it's delayed. SpongeBob is also allowed to jump out of this animation, and because he can only transform into a SpongeBob while on ground, we can repeat this loop of SpongeBob double jumping, floating through air, and then landing on the ground again in a double jump state. But we have to be careful not to move while we're on the ground. If we start walking before SpongeBob becomes airborne, the double jump animation will cancel and transition into his walk cycle, which will trigger the transformation to start. So we need to store the SpongeBob by using this exploit, all while grabbing this collectible wheel with this level design exploit, and continuing to store the SpongeBob all the way over to these tikis, where we'll finally transform and begin rolling as this second wheel attracts to us. Now let's pause for a second. We mentioned shiny objects, socks, and spatulas, but there's a 4th type of collectible now. In several levels of Battle for Bikini Bottom, there's actually a unique type of collectible to that level. In downtown Bikini Bottom, it's the steering wheels. In Rock Bottom, it's the artwork. And in other levels, there are objectives that are activated by hitboxes or triggers, which function similarly. When finding or completing all of these unique objectives in a level, the player is awarded a golden spatula. In downtown Bikini Bottom's case, we must find all 11 wheels to give to Mrs. Puff at the beginning of the level, for which she will award us a golden spatula. You get the idea. However, in an any percent speedrun, we will only collect 6 of these 11 wheels. We'll talk more about that in future parts of this series, but just know for now that we have to collect 6 of these wheels to activate a major exploit later in the run. I understand that even though we haven't even hit the 4-minute mark yet, there are a lot of exploits we're setting up that we have to keep track of. But don't worry, when we get to the points of the run where we execute these exploits, I will always recap how we set them up. So let's get back to the gameplay. Now that we're rolling in a SpongeBob state, we have slightly faster movement with a little bit less control. It's similar to a sliding state, however we can change directions with it and it's not tied to a designated platform. But we're going to roll on over to this next challenge and touch this trigger in a very specific spot to initiate this cutscene and cause this cannon to start firing. This initiates the Tiki's Go Boom task, for which completing it will award award us a golden spatula if we can hit all of the buttons on the ground here with the tiki stacked on them. If you look closely at this cannon, you'll notice that it bobs up and down. And because the cannon fires in random intervals, this effectively makes the cannon shoot at random heights at random times, which is super frustrating and for sure makes this the most annoying RNG segment in the entire game. However, luckily for us, this game is like 99% skill based, so the worst possible outcome you can get from this loses only 4 seconds. Now don't get me wrong, 4 seconds is a lot of time, especially at world record level, but remember this is the worst possible outcome. Most outcomes will range somewhere within those 0 to 4 seconds, and this cannon shot onto the first tiki stack is actually 100% consistent. This is because we initiated the cutscene in an exact spot, and the cannon always fires immediately after the cutscene ends. So we've already guaranteed this one, and we're just going to walk over to this button to hit it as the stack gets destroyed by the cannon. Once we've done this, we're going to walk over to this specific spot on the ground and double back in the opposite direction as the cannon is manipulated to hit the second stack. This one is like 90% consistent, but very rarely I'll reset to it when it misses. As we head over to the third stack of tikis, I'm going to walk by this thunder tiki, which is going to activate and explode when I walk away from it. These shush tikis as well, which disappear when I get close and reappear when I walk away, are all going to blow up with it, giving us a nice big combo, which can then be extended by hitting this next stack of tikis by quickly jumping onto this rock. Now in this run, I was not fortunate enough for this to happen, but as I mentioned before, this cannon can fire at random heights and random intervals, which allows for this fourth pillar to be shot and destroyed while I'm walking to this rock. But unfortunately in this situation, the sink was overshot and did not hit the thunder tiki on top of the stack, which would allow it to blow up. Fortunately, there is a reasonable backup for this, and by standing in the exact spot for the backup shot, I did not have to wait too long for it to come out in this run. So fortunately, we did not lose much time from this. Funny enough, I have to wait a tiny bit to hit the button after the pillar appears to explode, because the tail end of the explosion can actually hit me if I go too early. You probably also noticed that the bubble bounce hitbox comes out during the startup animation, so we can exploit this to hit these buttons immediately, which is useful for initiating the cutscene on the final button without having to wait longer for the attack to finish. And now that we've completed the Tikis Go Boom challenge, the spatula will appear on top of the statue. The platforming onto the statue is a little bit tricky, and I did not do it the best in this run, but we did end up with a middle of the road acceptable Tikis Go Boom skip, which allows us to continue the run. And to the more observant viewers, yes, all of those tikis that got destroyed by the sinks and the combos associated with them will contribute to the 3,000 shiny objects we need to have before leaving the Krusty Krab later. So pay close attention to those combos we're getting and all the tikis and robots we're destroying, because they're all meaningful. These tartar sauce robots take more than one hit to destroy with the bubble spin attack, so we're going to use this to our advantage and hit it into this stack of wooden tikis, which will help combo the wooden tikis with the thunder tiki explosion we just set off. Collect this sock during the robot's cooldown invincibility frames and hit it into the wooden tikis again within 1.1 seconds to hopefully combo the thunder tiki explosion into the stone tikis, all the wooden tikis, and the robots into one big combo. I didn't actually get the big combo in this run, which turned out to be fine in this situation, but in some runs when it's a lot tighter, it can really help a lot. Now notice the red dash on the ground here is very similar to the one in the hub world, which marked the out of bounds section that we used to disable the hand. So yes, this area is out of bounds, and if we stand on it for more than 2 seconds, SpongeBob will get grabbed, which will not only cause us to respawn at the next checkpoint, it also re-enables the hand itself. So if we don't get around this building in time, the entire run is completely over, because not only dying and having to restart and then going back and re-disabling the hand all costs way too much time. And you actually can't jump around this building in a normal playthrough either, because there is an invisible out of bounds trigger outside of this building, which we disable by disabling the hand. So already you're seeing why the hand disable is one of the most important tricks in the entire run. The out of bounds kill timer will only count up as long as we're on the out of bounds sand. So by carefully spacing jumps to stall SpongeBob in air, we can quickly and carefully navigate around this building back into bounds and skip a couple of major sections in downtown Bikini Bottom. And as we activate another Tiki pillar for major shiny object bonuses, we now approach what most viewers consider the biggest reset point in the early section of the run. As implied earlier, the Thunder Tiki's explosion deals damage to SpongeBob, so from receiving this damage we could of course perform a frame perfect damage triple jump out of it. The thunder and blinking visual cues on this Tiki are inconsistent, unfortunately, so this timing is mostly based on feel, but we need to walk off of this Tiki and bash at an exact time, otherwise SpongeBob will get locked in his bash animation and get sent straight to the ground. So this window is a little bit tight, but as you can see we did manage to get it here. SpongeBob is suspended in midair and is also in the damage animation. Now once again, as mentioned in the first part of this video series, we only have 1/60th of a second to press the A button to get this jump, and there are 5 different damage animations we need to be able to consistently react to in order to consistently perform this trick. The curveball here though is the in-game console lag. Downtown Bikini Bottom does not run at a consistent 60 FPS when facing in this direction, although it's hard to tell based on the recording. If the game is dipping even a tiny bit below 60 FPS into the high 50s, that is impacting the timing for this extremely precise 1/60th of a second frame perfect jump. Because remember, if we're timing this to be on an exact single frame and it's being pushed back a tiny bit by lag, we have to understand how the in-level console lag, along with the particle effects of the thundercloud and explosion, are impacting the timing of this frame perfect jump. But jumping on the exact final frame of this animation successfully allows us to get the unintended grounded jump and then the double jump on top of this copper building, which allows us to collect this sock. Now we're going to space a couple of tight jumps and a spin to reach this next building without grabbing the ledge, because unintentionally grabbing a ledge in any scenario loses a second and a half off the run. Now we're going to grab this wheel and make our way back over to this next cannon, which behaves similarly to the Tiki's Go Boom cannon, except it's a lot smaller. Unfortunately, that also means that the projectiles are not only random in the timing they are shot out, but also in the direction, which very much impacts the consistency of this next trick. By standing on the tip of the cannon in this exact spot, we can wait for and anticipate the cannon firing, which should damage SpongeBob and hopefully send him in the correct direction, which allows us to get another damage boosted frame perfect triple jump off of the cannon's projectile, and from here, guide SpongeBob with the single jump, double jump, and spin to land precisely on this small pipe, which supports this platform with the spatula on it from this building. So not only does this cannon fire at a random time, which the player needs to react to in order to react to one of the next 5 animations which we can do the frame perfect jump out of, we also need to consider the console lag that is caused by downtown, but also the particle effects coming out of the cannon, all while the projectile's angle being sent too high or too low can influence the way that SpongeBob is thrown off the cannon. If you don't stand in the exact spot that accommodates all of these different projectile angles, there's a good chance you'll just get sent off to the side or sent straight to the ground. So with the frame perfect jump out of one of 5 animations during console lag, along with the random direction you're sent into at a random time, this trick is just next level. Especially with having to do the extra laggy frame perfect jump with an inconsistent visual cue immediately before this, it's easy to see why downtown is one of the biggest run killers in the entire game. Now, as a fun fact, what if I told you there is a far more consistent alternative route for this that avoids both laggy frame perfect jumps and only sacrifices 5 to 6 seconds? Again, 5 to 6 seconds may be a lot of time at world record level, but that is precisely the point. These are the kinds of measures we must take in a run this optimized to save every last second possible. And if that alternate trick piqued your curiosity a bit, don't worry, we got another trick coming up in just a bit that's going to be very similar. So you'll get the full explanation for that coming up shortly. So now that we skipped this entire level that includes all the SpongeBob tutorial stuff and learning Sandy's moves, because yes, Sandy's playable in this game, you just haven't seen her yet, we can enter the downtown rooftops and get ready to set up the next trick. Now that we've unlocked the task warp for the downtown rooftops, we can pause the game and warp back to the spatula we just collected, which places us as Sandy at the start of her tutorial section. But the first thing we're going to do is switch back to SpongeBob, because we need to use SpongeBob to set up this next trick that allows us to skip the majority of the downtown rooftops. While switching to SpongeBob, however, take notice that Sandy is going to lasso these tikis on the ground which you can't see, which, because it's simultaneously happening while we're switching to another character, optimizes the time it takes to get those tikis instead of having to drop to the ground, activate them, destroy the gate, and walk around. Instead, we can just jump straight over the gate of SpongeBob and draw a straight line to the sponge ball, which we are going to use to set up this next trick called SpongeBob displacement jumping. And I'm not referring to these jumps here, these jumps are still just SpongeBob storage. But as we jump onto this stack of tikis here and do a circular, precise motion around to stay on top of them as we transform, this is the beginning setup to the SpongeBob displacement jump. If you take another look at these tikis, they will expand and contract based on when you're close to them or not. You might also remember this from earlier on Tiki's Go Boom, when we got close to those shush tikis by the Thunder Tiki and they contracted, and when we walked away they expanded, which gave us a bigger combo and which will also give us a bigger combo here, but I digress. Despite that being important, focus right now on the fact that we are storing on these tikis when they're at a lower height and rolling away from them so they expand again, and therefore push the position where we stored, which was on top of the tiki, to a higher height than where it was before. So we store the SpongeBob position on the tikis when they're low and roll away so that position gets pushed higher. This section here between the low point and the high point is effectively how much the SpongeBob has displaced during this action. So when we release the SpongeBob, he will displace at this extreme amount of height in exactly 1 frame. If you look very closely at this example of me only releasing, you can actually see that. But of course, we're going to be doing more than just only releasing. We're going to be using this displacement to do a SpongeBob displacement jump. And this next part is where it's going to get a little bit complicated, because we're going to use tech called V VMS to store this SpongeBob displacement jump into the other level that we just came from. VMS is short for vertical momentum storage, and as the name implies, we can store vertical momentum through loads as long as we pause the game on any particular frame of displacement, load the next level, and jump on the exact first frame when the character loads in the level. In this specific situation, the displacement that we want only exists for one frame, because releasing the SpongeBob causes that single frame of displacement that we talked about earlier to come out. You know, the one that we created by storing on top of the tikis and moving away. So what we need to do is roll far away from these tikis so they expand and give us the displacement frame. Then once we're far enough away, press the B button and then the start button the exact frame after the B button is pressed. And again, because of console lag in downtown Bikini Bottom, the frame timing on this can be a bit weird. But if done correctly, SpongeBob will release from the SpongeBall and the game will pause before he expends the displacement frame. Now we can scroll over to the Swing and Sandy task, which we unlocked from entering the rooftops earlier, and time an A press on the exact frame that the level loads in to perform a jump harnessing the SpongeBob displacement which was transferred from the previous level. And in doing such, we have successfully performed a SpongeBob displacement jump VMS. Now we can interrupt our jump, land on top of this building, and collect the spatula. In doing so, we have not only skipped half of downtown rooftops, we've also gotten some extra shiny object bonuses from backtracking through the earlier part of downtown and letting those tikis explode while collecting the wheel on the streets. So this whole maneuver gives us a lot of extra shiny objects, a wheel, and a spatula. This is why downtown is such a cool level to me, because of all the huge skips and weird backtracking, optimizing the collection, and also the crazy tech that we use to do all of this. So if you're enjoying this section of the speedrun as much as I am, remember to leave a like on this video. The feedback really helps a lot. Now would be a great time to take a little break from the speedrun route to explain how teleport boxes work. Teleport boxes are scattered around most levels of Battle for Bikini Bottom, usually having one at the start linked to one at the end. So if the player reaches the end of the level and opens the box at the end, they can jump back into the box and be teleported to the beginning. And likewise have a new shortcut from the beginning of the level to the end of the level if they've already completed it. But with the power of imagination, we can turn this convenient gameplay element into an exploit. For several of these teleport boxes throughout the game, you can actually jump into the box at the end without having to activate the one at the start. This specific box requires additional conditions, but we've already completed them because we got the Swing and Sandy spatula by use of SDJ VMS. So to their credit, I don't think the developers could have foreseen that. So we can jump into the box for the Swing and Sandy task and get teleported to the start of the task, which is conveniently around halfway through the entire level. At least for the way that we're going to be doing it. You probably already caught on to this, but Sandy, unlike SpongeBob and Patrick, actually has an extra lasso glide past her 2 jumps, which can be used to cross large gaps. She can also latch onto these Texas-shaped swingers to regain both her jumps and then the lasso glide again. So we can exploit this to skip this building on the left and go straight to the next one. Just a simple platforming exploit, but this next one is going to skip a large portion of this level. This part actually has a funny little instance of RNG because these little robots here can push the big robot around, and we need to jump on this big robot to grab this ledge and collect this wheel earlier than intended. From here, if we run off this little board of wood, which does have a tiny bit of extra collision, we can space 2 jumps and a lasso glide to barely get on top of this next building without having to grab the ledge an extra time. And because Sandy's grab animation is twice as long as SpongeBob's, this is a really big time save. Now this next part is actually a funny little exploit because you're supposed to land on top of this taller part of this building in a casual playthrough in order for Sandy to be able to latch onto this next Texas swinger. But if we jump off of this lower section, which is technically the failure section, we can space 2 jumps and then a lasso glide perfectly to barely latch onto this next swinger. Now after a little bit of platforming, we're going to attempt to manipulate this chuck to throw the missile away from me with a very subtle and well-timed turn. However, I did mess it up in this run and this missile is going to go right for me. So we're just going to navigate around it ever so slightly and take that tiny little bit of time loss, which is still a lot better than getting a rocket to the face and falling 3,000 feet to my death. But ideally, we would have preferred to draw a straight line to this robot, which we are going to kick in the face for an extra 50 shiny objects. Another question I commonly get is why we switched to SpongeBob at this bus stop before getting the spatula. And this is because when collecting a spatula, the character always turns to face you. So if we collected the spatula as Sandy first, she'd turn around to us and then we'd have to turn around again to switch back to SpongeBob. But doing it this way allows us to hit the bus stop behind the spatula first and then switch to SpongeBob, which turns him around. And from here we can just walk left and hit this button, which will activate the trampoline that takes us to the lighthouse, which is the first combat challenge we will actually participate in. During the "Are you ready, kids" prompt, we can only accept, decline, or turn the camera. So as we mash through the prompt, we're going to turn the camera while we're doing this to optimize our time a bit and space some surprisingly precise jumps onto this wheel on the door. floor. Similarly to Squidward's house, it's a little bit weird to get his feet to collide on this for platforming, but once we've done that, we can jump on top of this door and space 2 jumps and a spin to collect this sock, which actually skips a longer challenge after the lighthouse is completed to backtrack from the end by bouncing up all the different levels to collect the sock at the beginning. But we're just going to collect it now and then destroy all the robots on this level to initiate the next level of the fight. A cool little optimization for falling through these floors as they get destroyed is actually jumping slightly before and timing it just perfectly so SpongeBob falls through the floor as it's breaking. This is a tiny bit faster than standing on the floor and waiting for it to break, because by already falling, we've already peaked SpongeBob's falling velocity, instead of starting from a standing position and forcing him to reach that fall velocity on his own. If we destroy the Duplicatatron responsible for producing more robots as we fall to the floor, we can get him before he's able to create any of them, which therefore immediately wipes out all the robots on that section and initiates the next section to start. So the floor is going to break into little jigsaw pieces yet again, and we're just going to repeat this process for the next few levels. On the final spinning platform level, however, we're going to hit the Duplicatatron and line up a damage boost, which is going to send us directly to the next Duplicatatron across the entire room on the next level. This optimization saves half a second off the speedrun, and by doing this we've also prevented the robot from producing its own robots, but we still have the Duplicatatron on the other side of the room to take care of. As we make our way across the ground level to reach it, we have to be very quick to touch this Thunder Tiki in the center of the room to ignite it. If we're not quick enough, the stone tikis that fell from the top levels will barricade the area around the tiki and prevent us from igniting it. But if we do this quickly enough, we will not only combo the tikis on the ground level, we will also combo the ones that fell from the upper levels, which is going to give us a ton of shiny objects. It is therefore absolutely essential that we touch this Thunder Tiki on the way over to the other side of the lighthouse, otherwise the run is absolutely over. On the way up to the other Duplicatatron, we can actually clip into this laser gate just slightly enough so that the wheel tracks to us, which just prevents us from having to walk all the way back for it later after the challenge is over and the electrical gates are down. Now that we've destroyed the final Duplicatatron, all we have to do is take care of the rest of the robots on the ground. The smaller robots on the ground will actually follow us, and a good amount of the time they'll self-destruct into the electrical barricade on their own. But the Chuck, or the floating robot that we saw earlier, spawns on the bottom floor of the lighthouse in 4 different potential areas. Again, another instance of RNG. But in this run we got a pretty good spawn, because it's relatively close to the area we're walking to anyway. One thing to mention though is that the Chuck spawn placement did not give us a good enough path to collect this purple shiny object on the way, which would have given us an extra 50 shiny objects. Because we missed this shiny object and also the bigger combo on the tartar sauce robot earlier in the run, we're going to see this run will potentially be very tight on shiny objects. So pay close attention to that going into the next part of this video series. Now that we've completed the lighthouse fight, we can walk over and collect the spatula with the camera faced away from the door. So that way when SpongeBob celebrates the spatula, he doesn't turn around to face us, which would be away from the door in that case. So in our case, he's already facing the door, so we can just hold the control stick down and use the R trigger to leave the lighthouse. Now that we've exited the lighthouse, we're just about ready to leave downtown, which means we're just about ready to move on to the second hub world, the third hub world, and the final platforming level of the game, SpongeBob's Dream. If that makes absolutely no sense to you, it will soon. Subscribe and enable notifications, because in the next part, we're going to talk about 2 of the biggest skips in the entire game.